Good morning.
Morning, Eric. Can you see the slide okay?
Yes, just fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, Dave, this is Dan.
Yeah.
I will not be around for the meeting. I'm going to go jump to another meeting, but I just wanted to be explicit that I had approved minutes. So if that comes up for a vote, you can take Intel as having approved it.
Thank you. I generated a couple of minor comments, which you can review in the pull request, and I hope that won't affect your vote.
Yeah,
And
I
so-
saw those, and
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, you'll vote yes either way. Okay, thank you for filing your vote.
Thanks. All right, see you guys later. I'll check out the recording when it's posted.
All right, thanks, Thomas. All right, and I think we're already at quorum now, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started then. Thank you all for being here on time. Welcome all to the Technical Advisory Council meeting. This meeting is part of the Confidential Computing Consortium, where we try to make this meeting be an open, collaborative meeting. The only things that we really vote on are budget and approval of minutes, and I don't think we have any budget items to vote on today, which means that this meeting is everybody here can participate as part of the collaborative community. Also, every project meeting our criteria is welcome. If there's people that have additional projects, then we would be happy to consider them and accept contributions. This meeting is, however, covered by the Linux Foundation's antitrust policy. I don't think I see anybody new, but just in the interest of repetition, linuxfoundation.org/antitrust-policy. All right, so this is the currently stated agenda. I'm going to quickly skip to the end in case there's any agenda bashing on either of two topics here. Here you can see this is July 14th, where we had said if there was anything to report on governance or trust domains, we kind of had maybe placeholders here, but that could also be at a future meeting here. So in case somebody wants to add a governance or a trust domains topic to the agenda, we may have time. I say that, which sometimes guarantees we won't, but we can reorder stuff. And so is there anything that people would like added to this agenda list or perhaps reordered based on time?
Hi, Dave. Excuse me.
Yeah. Yes.
This is Nick from the Anarch project.
Yeah.
I sent an email to the list regarding the Anarch hardware. I wonder if that fits somewhere. Maybe common test infrastructure. Would that be it?
Yes. I'm going to make sure we
Okay.
get to that. But I'm just going to reorder these two here. And Kurt, if you can help me remember that I switched the order because I didn't switch the order of the slides here. So we'll call this one testing, of which there's two sub pieces, which is Anarchs hardware and ARCs hardware, email, and common test infrastructure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I moved updates from outreach down, so let's just do that. Okay. And you just have to remind me if I don't bring it up that when we get to the common test infrastructure slide, that you'll go before that slide.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other agenda requests? Okay. And just making sure Penguin is already on, since we'll talk about your item after the action item review. So, okay, great. All right, let's do a quick roll call here. Like I said, I think we're at quorum here. I do not see Giuseppe. I do see Tate. Thomas Fasati was here and then just dropped, but he already filed his vote. And so for purposes on the minutes, so for purposes of minutes, that was
Dave,
quorum.
Dave, I'm here.
Oh, you're still here. Okay.
Yeah, still here.
Eric Northup. Yulia. I do see Howard here.
Yep.
I saw Dan a second ago. Looks like we lost Dan temporarily.
I
I
think
see
Dan
me. Yeah.
was who
Oh, Dan was the one that
went
dropped.
away.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
right. You're right. Sorry.
Other meeting.
Sorry,
too,
Thomas,
yeah.
for confusing. Okay, and I'm here and Lily's here, and so even after Dan dropped, we still have quorum between Tate, Thomas, myself, Lily, and Howard. Is there anybody here? I think all the names that have been here have been here a bunch of times, and so I don't see anybody that hasn't introduced themselves multiple times in the past. So we will go on unless somebody else joins that is new, and let me know. All right, so minutes. Let's go to the requests for the minutes. That is not it. That is not it. This one is it. Here we go. So these are the minutes. I can see Dan has signed off and I filed a couple of minor comments. My comments were just that some of the names appear twice in the attendance. And I had one trivial wording change here. And the link to the slides, which have already been uploaded. Okay. So those are things that I consider editorial that don't affect the content of the meeting. And so I would be happy to vote yes, although I would love Kurt to merge these commits before committing the change. But is there anybody else that either needs more time or would vote abstain or vote no? Any other amendments to the?
I wasn't there, so I think I have to abstain, but no problems with it.
Okay, noted. Anyone else other than Lily have any amendments to the minutes or an abstain? Okay, then we will consider the minutes passed with a recommendation that Kurt, you accept my comments and then merge.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you all for that. All right, so let's go through some action items here. Stephen is not on the call, but in case there's anybody that does have a report here, any reports from any of the projects on the diversity and inclusion training from the Linux Foundation for maintainers from the projects? Anybody have an update on that one? I think Stephen is the mentor for the only project that hasn't reported back in the past. So, which was that Grameen? Let me check which one is Stephen's name by. It's Keystone. Yeah, Keystone is the only one that hasn't reported back yet. All right, mentors to reach out to the project for getting the maintainers involved in common test infrastructure. We do have an agenda item here. We'll see if people have anything to report out during that agenda item. Otherwise, it could be a short agenda item if we get there and say nothing new to talk about yet. So we'll find out. But this is on the agenda later, so I'm going to keep going. Outreach is also on the agenda later, so we'll come back to this one because this one is on a slide later. So Kurt and Helen will talk about that when we get to that slide. Whoops. Mark and Thomas and folks, governance subgroup discussion. This is what I just asked, whether we needed a full agenda item, and we said no. So any status update on this one and when you think it'd be ready to discuss in a TAC meeting?
I would say not for at least another couple of weeks. We are now in the process of figuring out our charter, and we have a lot of ideas that still need to be sifted through and organized and sorted and prioritized. And we still need to speak to some governance bodies so we can get that perspective. It's going. I think we're making good progress, but not yet at a point where we can make a coherent, cohesive, presentation to this body. But we will as soon as we can.
Okay, so I've tentatively moved it out to August 11th, but this is still tentative, and so if you need to change that, let us know, but at least it's a placeholder.
That's
so-
perfect. August 11th is a good forcing function for us. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so the LF security. This one, even though the Kurt's one has been done. Kurt, my understanding is I can remove your name right here and just leave mentors. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's fine.
Because there's nothing else you have to do. Is there? I mean, the next step is on the mentors, and they can contact you if they need assistance, right?
Correct. Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay, so the part that's done is not the mentors part. I'm just going to leave it like this because it is up to the mentors to continue to evangelize like this particular URL to your projects. If you haven't done that yet, reach out to them with this particular link here. Maybe Kurt, you can copy that into the chat too, in case there's mentors on here that want to grab it without pulling up the slides, but
Oh, sure, we'll do.
okay. All right, Kurt, on this one, I don't think this has happened yet, but when should we try to get this meeting here?
That is okay. Yeah, that's the test infrastructure.
Yeah, that's true. We can cover this in the test infrastructure case. Well, let's defer that and cover it all in the one slide.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we'll do it later.
So this is a test infrastructure discussion. Okay, just reminding me what that is. And unrelated to test infrastructure, this is the Slack channel discussion. Mentors to collect questions for determining interest. Should we put a deadline on this, or has there been any progress on this one? I'm guessing there's not a significant progress unless we put a deadline on it. I think Nick, you were commenting on some of the next steps are. Do you have any guesses as to what a reasonable deadline is for collecting questions? Because this is for creating it, right?
Okay.
Because otherwise this could be on here for 6 months with no progress. So, but if we advertise a deadline, then maybe we'll actually get something. So.
Yes, so maybe by the next meeting. Well, do you think that's reasonable?
It is if we send a reminder to the TAC list like a week from now.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if either you or Kurt can help by sending a reminder mail about a week from now.
Okay,
You want to do that?
sure.
Okay. So it's useful to have a reminder mail shortly after the meeting if there's any mentors that aren't on here, and then like a week from now saying you got a week left or whatever, because it's the reminders that actually cause something to happen. Otherwise people forget about it until, oh yeah, I was going to do something. At least I'm speaking for myself here, so since I'm one of them. And then this one was done. Thank you, Helen. So we can drop that one. This one was submitted, I think the day before the deadline. The board was very quick in the actual vote once the things was out there, and so this one was sent. So thank you all for the work last meeting on finishing the OSTP response. My understanding is that Outreach did not make any modifications after we did our work, and so the version that got sent would match the version that we had at the end of our meeting. Helen, let me know if that's not the case, but that's my understanding.
Yep, that's right.
Great, thank you for your help. So that's the end of the action items. And so now, since remember, I had to drop off in the last 15 minutes of last meeting to get set up for another panel. So I don't know how this went last time, other than the note in the minutes that it happened. So I'm just going to hand it to Peng Lin to carry on with wherever everybody else ended up there. So.
Okay, so Yeah, last time I briefly introduced this document, so this meeting I can introduce more detail about it. So
Okay, would you like to share your screen?
yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. Sure. Yeah, can you see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. So this is the document about the tip use case. How about let's start from the notional architecture of that. In this architecture, it's basically from the tip architecture, and the difference is that I added the item called data owner, which is also the network user who uses the computational computing resource from the network, and also added an item called MOC, which is management and orchestration center, and the time is inside the MOC. Another difference is that the tip broker. So originally the tip broker is for communication between the tip agent and the time. But in the remote environment, there should have some item that is in charge of launching or pull up the UA in the RE. So I think the tip broker is a good choice to do that job. So this is the basic information of this architecture. And here is another issue I think we could discuss is the package. I used to talk with Eric about the package definition, and he suggested me to make it clear. So I think that package in this document is a unit that is signed or encrypted by a data owner and could be deployed in the T or V or treated as application data. And the TA in computational computing could be application or packaged with other components like a library, T-shim, or even guest OS like the Chrome or Gramming, some other objects. And the specific package of the computational computing could refer to the white paper of the common terminology of CCC that we used to discuss it before. So this is a definition I think is useful here. Also, you can interrupt me at any time we can discuss. And the connection between the network user and MOC depends on the implementation of the specific network, since this is a use case for using CC in network. And the connection between the network user and the untrusted application or trusted application, that depends on the implementation of this application. Maybe it is a TLS or HTTPS, which is fine. And the connection between the time and tip broker and tip agent refers to the tip protocol. So the following is a use case. This is an interesting topic, I think. So there are different scenarios that the network user may want to package its application in different scenarios, like the UATA and the person data bundled as a package. I think this is mentioned by the tip architecture before, so I just use that in here. And the steps that will be needed to deploy the package in the computational environment is like this. First, the network user will request for computational computing resource to the network MOC. And then the time in the MOC will orchestrate a computational computing device to undertake the request. The first two steps are clear. And the third one is that the time will request a remote attestation to the tip agent, and the tip agent then responds the evidence to time, and then the time work as the relying party and forward an attestation result to the network user. So I think that before we deploy any personal data to the TEE in the computational computing, we should do the remote attestation first. I think this is a principle. So the following use cases are also follow this principle. And the fourth step is that after verification, the network user will transfer the package to the time and let time transfer this package to tip agent. The fifth step is interesting because I think that since this package is concludes that UATA and personal data, so it must be a encrypted package. And in the fifth step, we need to a network user need to establish the secure channel with tip agent via time and transfer the decryption key to the tip agent. And this secure channel is possible because we could use the TLS to establish this secure channel and transfer this decryption key. And I think this step is also is necessary in this use case. The sixth step is that the tip agent may deploy the TA and the personal data, and then deploy UA in the read via tip broker. So I think this is my basic logic of this tip use case. And for informing the network user to deploy their applications, the mapping of UA, TA, and the implementation are shown.
Hang on, I got a question. I don't know if you can see hands and stuff, but I did have a question. I wanted to ask if you could elaborate more on step one, how you might how that might happen in some case. As step one is, if you can just say a little bit more about how that one might happen in your view. So.
I think this depends on what network you are using. Maybe it's very specific use case, and we just say it here, and we don't say that you must do this or that way. Maybe it depends on the network you are using. So, for example, maybe you are MEC network or CAN network. They are different of implementation.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could give an example verbally.
I'm sorry, I can't give you.
Okay. So since I haven't read the draft yet, although I will before IETF. And so other than I'm reading it as you're scrolling through it right now, but I'll read it again before we have the discussion in TEEP. But
okay.
But the network user. Is your discussion here where the network user has physical possession of the device with the TEE? Is the network user a person that's sitting inside the operations center? Where is the network user in this picture?
I'm sorry, it's my fault. I think the network user is the data owner, which who wants to use the computational computing resource by the network.
Okay, so in general, the data owner is in a third location that's neither inside the MOC nor in the location of the component.
Yes.
And the data owner is using like TLS sessions and so on to communicate with the UA or with the TAM, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
Okay. So I will continue. I think your question is very good, and I will try to find a very example how to explain this.
Okay, no, that helps. Just knowing that it's in a third location that communicates using a network protocol that's out of scope for the document, but you're presuming that there's an existing one and that using it. Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. And here I will continue. As for informing network user to develop their applications, and so the mapping of UAP and application are shown in this figure 2. And I also list out the hardware architecture like Transton STX SCV and these main series of these hardwares. So the breeze means the operation steps that need to deploy the package, and the arrow means deploy package to a destination. So here is a table that I want to say about it. So first is that the instance type, like you have a computational process in a physical or virtual machine, or container in a physical virtual machine, or even just a computational VM. And the hardware architecture is that who support this instance type. And here is a question that I want to ask Dave. I think you are the author of the TEEP architecture. So you mentioned that in the original STX that usually we deploy the UA first and then let the UA to call for the TA and then trap into the SGX. Is that right?
I'm not sure I understand the question, although I'm one of the co-authors. David Wheeler from Intel was the person that was the SGX expert in the TEEP architecture, where a lot of the discussion was about how for some use cases, meaning like the classic enclave as opposed to like a the Oclam style, libOS style, but for the classic stuff that you would not need the TEEP protocol. The TEEP protocol in SGX is more aligned with, say, the use of a libOS where you're trying to deploy something inside the libOS, where the TEEP protocol would be relevant for SGX because you'd have the TEEP agent, say, running inside your Oclam or Grameen or whatever container.
Yes,
using the term container loosely. So
yeah. So I mean, if you have a Oclam or a Grameen, you can use SGX in this use case one. I think here is the TEEP architecture document. I think the architecture mentioned that in
right.
Yeah, so I think that if we have Oclam or Grameen, so we can use
Grameen or
SGX.
any other libOS style thing that can have stuff that could be deployed inside an enclave, or the thing that could be deployed could even be like a JavaScript script, it could be data, it could be an application or something, depending on how the packaging model works. So
I just drop this note. Okay. So this table shows that how to use this computer computing.
And remind me, case one.
Yeah.
Case one is the case where all three are bundled, right? That's the I just don't remember the numbers. Okay, where the untrusted application, like the hosting application, and the trusted application inside the TE, and any data, this configuration, are all packaged together into a single package.
Yeah. Yes. So this is the case two, and the personal data is a separate package, and the trust application and the untrusted application are separated or integrated. So in this case,
so for case. Okay, so now I understand. So case one, I would say SGX is
case one is
I don't know if okay, now I understand why you had a question mark in case one.
Yeah.
It's actually far better in the case where it's SGX is certainly applicable in the case where it's the TA and the personalization data that are bundled together or kept separate, but putting the UA with it is the case that makes it be a question mark for SGX.
Yes. So
and maybe this does apply to some of the terminology. Document discussion we'll have later.
Yeah. So this is a case two, and I also list out the steps that you need to deploy in the case two. And the first two steps are similar, and the third one is that the network user will transfer UA and TA to the computer computing resource via time, and then time then deploy these two applications in RE and P respectively. Here I list out that myself.
So here's how I would summarize my feedback, and I think that there's only one other TEEP person, which is Hank, who's even on the. I don't know if Eric, if you've been in any of the TEEP discussions, but I think TEEP is not normally used to deploy the untrusted application. And so you would use some transfer protocol to get it. And so the bundling, you can bundle, say, trusted applications along with an untrusted application if it's appropriately signed and can be done at the data integrity layer, but you wouldn't need TEEP to deploy the bundle that includes the UA. And so that's what I was trying to get at when I talked about the case one and SGX, is to say, if you're bundling the UA with it, then you might be using a mechanism other than the TEEP protocol to deploy the package.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Okay.
The TEEP protocol doesn't actually care because it's agnostic as what the thing is. It's just a typical use case. I don't know if there's a use case for using TEEP to deploy the UA, but if you have one, then it's not disallowed or anything. So.
Yeah, but I mean, I think
And that's
we-
because the TEAP protocol terminates inside the TEE, right? So if you're saying, in order to deploy the untrusted application into the normal OS, I first have to send all the bits into the TEE so that the TEE can then put them, pass them on outside that. That doesn't seem to be any optimal way to do it, but it would work. But there's probably much more straightforward ways to do it using existing protocols to get the untrusted application into their normal OS. So.
Yeah, I mean, in the case one, if we have like Chrome or Grameen, that they can help to use the libOS to simulate the kernel mode of the operating system. So maybe it could be used to decrypt the package and install the TA directly.
Yeah. It's just for cases like SGX, which don't have any trusted storage, right? You have untrusted storage that you can store stuff that might be encrypted with a trusted key that's only accessible in the TEE, but the storage, anybody can have access to the file system and do deletions and things like that, right? And so that's why using a protocol other than TEAP, meaning one that terminates in the normal world, if all you're going to do is slap something on the file system and verify it at load time, then you don't need the TEAP protocol to do the transfer, right? You need the TEAP protocol if you have something like trusted storage, like in TrustZone, if you're using RPMB or something that only the TE can access, or some type of secure flash or whatever, then you have to have the TEAP protocol because you can't put it into the normal world because it doesn't even have access to that storage, right? And so.
Okay. So here is the it's two. And the fourth step is that the time will request a remote attestation to the TIP agent, and it's also the remote attestation step. And the fifth, that after the remote attestation, you can the network user could establish the secure channel with the trust application, and then deploy its personal data to the TA. I think this is also necessary. Is that the secure channel because you don't want to leak your personal data in the network. Yeah, here this is step 2, and I also list out the table and introduce this sequence and the hardware architecture support. So the 4.3 is this case, and in this case, the process of TIP is as follows. And these two first step are the same, and the third one is that the network user will transfer UA to the time, and then the time will request a remote attestation. And then the fifth step is that the network user will transfer the encrypted TA and the PD to the time, since they are packaged as a bundle. And then the time will transfer this package to the TIP agent, and the network user will create a secure channel with TIP agent and transfer the decryption key to the TIP agent. So the sixth step is that the TIP agent will decrypt this package and deploy TA and PD. So here is the table that I list out. And the 4.4 is the TA and PD are a package, and there's no UA. So this is more similar, and I think this will be more popular in the future. And in this case, the network user will provide the TA and PD as a package with no UA attached. So the process of TIP in this case is as follows. And these first two steps are the same, and the third one is also the remote attestation. And the fourth step is that the network user will transfer this package to time, and then the time will transfer the package to the TIP agent. Since this package is still encrypted, so the fifth step is that a network user will estimate the secure channel with the TIP agent and transfers a decryption key to the TIP agent. And the sixth step is that TIP agent will then decrypt this package and deploys TA and PD. Yeah, here is the table that try to list out this information. And the 4.5 is that the TA and PD are a separate package, and there's no untrusted application. So in this case, the network user will provide a TA and PD as separate packages, and the first two steps are the same. And then the third one is that a network user will transfer TA to time, and time deploy this TA to TE through TIP agent. And the fourth step is that time will request the remote attestation, and then the remote attestation result will return to the network user. And the fifth step is that the network user will establish the secure channel with TA and transfer the PD to it. So yeah, here is the table to illustrate that. So this is the basic information of this document, and yeah, that's it. In the end, there is another. There's an appendix. Try to introduce that all these sub-modules may be involved in the TIP agent. For example, there may be an outcome and maybe Grameen, and even the NX could be inside in the TE to help the application and to run inside the computing environment. Yeah, so this is basic information of this document.
So I had another question or two at the end of your case 6.
Case
You can
6.
scroll up to just a little bit here. Yeah,
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
So when you talked about how the network user would transfer the personalization data to the TA, without going to the TAM, in your use case, would you use TEEP, or would you just use whatever other protocol that you'd implement in the TA that could be, arbitrary?
Yeah, because after the TA is deployed in the TA environment, maybe the TA has a network function, then it can just direct communicate to the network user, so they can create a secure channel. That means directly, or you could via a time transfer this packet to transfer this secret information to. And since the different cases that can be used here.
Right. So you're not talking about the TEEP protocol. This could be anything. And so it seems to me like you'd want attestation there too. And so I wonder if this secure channel is the sort of stuff that the attestation SIG has been talked about with, say, attested TLS and things like that. So that's my question there.
I'm not sure what SIG talk about. So I just want to say is that there must have a secure channel between the TA and the network user, so the personal data will not be leaked by the network.
Yeah. I guess all I'm observing is that when you say secure channel, what does secure channel mean? And I'm saying a tested channel, not just secure channel.
It may be not a tested channel, maybe it's a TLS channel. Yeah.
What the attestation SIG has been talking about is there's a number of projects that currently have different ways, but that's been comparing them is that not only TLS, but using attestation as part of the TLS. I saw Hank has his hand up, so maybe he'll talk about it better. So I see the floor to Hank.
You mean that in the TLS, the signature or the certificate is attestation evidence?
Go ahead, Hank, if you're on this topic.
Yeah, so the term secure channel is a tad bit loaded. So we are, the first reference I want to make in the IETF is the unprotected CWT claims set. That's if that is not signed, if that claims set is not signed, you have to need a substitute for the signature, and we're calling that a secure channel. That is not an attested channel, though, necessarily. It might be self-asserted, it might be well known and endorsed due to the key material, but that does not mean that the channel is attested, because it is literally used to convey the attestation evidence to create an attestation result, and that therefore it cannot be attested in that scenario. So there, a secure channel is simply a substitute for the object security that we would have if signed by a root of trust or by a key material derived from a root of trust. And so I think more words typically do not help, but in this case they would. Like, why is it secure? What's the security actually?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is more complicated, and here I just want to say that this channel must be encrypted, so the
I mean, if
personalization
your
will be safe.
personalization data contains confidential information,
Yes.
Could even be something like, a decryption key or a key to be used with some other confidential service or whatever, right? Then transferring the PD to it would be very dangerous if it was actually not attested, right? Because you don't actually have have some guarantee. I guess another way of phrasing it would be, how do you authenticate the TA? And in other words, how do you know that the TA has the right credentials? Where do you get that from? Because does that give you the same level of guarantee as if it was attested or not? And so those are design questions.
Yeah, my thought is that maybe when we use for example, when we use TLS to establish the communication, and the certificate maybe is bundled with the TE. So I think that means the attestation channel you mentioned.
Yeah, I just wanted to draw your attention that this is a topic that the CCC attestation SIG has been doing a survey on. And I just wonder how much your use case would actually need the stuff that they've been talking about or not. And so that's why I raised the questions.
Yeah, I think your question is very good. I may need more attention about the SIG.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are my questions. Thank you. Anybody else have other questions for Penguin?
No, one
this
thing
is-
only is that I'm due to create a write-up for the for all the secure channel establishment modes that involve attestation, and I will forward it to you, Penguin, as soon as it's ready. It should be ready by next week. So you can check that.
Okay,
No
okay.
problem.
Yeah, I will check the SIG meeting. Thank you.
Great. I observe that this is currently on the agenda for the TEAP meeting in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, I also
About-
yeah. I try to present this case in that meeting.
In what?
Yeah, in the TIP meeting.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, okay. So I will stop sharing the screen.
All right. All right, thanks, Penguin. So that was the slot for, that was our tech talk slot for this meeting. So now we will proceed with the remainder of the agenda here. Now wanted to go into the common terminology paper. Somebody had asked what the goal of today's meeting was. We had an open question or two. I think there's 2 issues filed, and we wanted to see if we can make progress on those 2 issues to see if we can get closer to closing on the actual content, right? We have a draft PDF that's waiting for us to submit any updates. And so I don't know if I want to drive this, or Eric, are you prepared to like share your screen with the actual document on it again? Do you want to do that?
I'm not able to share it, but I'm certainly able to talk.
Dave,
Okay, then
the links for all of the above or everything you just discussed are on the next slide.
Yeah, this one. Yes, the links for the issues, right? And so I've got
And the
one.
PDF is on.
I already opened one of those. Did I open the other one too? I think not. Let me close some of these here. All right. So let me open each of these links here. I didn't know if I was going to be sharing or somebody else was. So let me open those 2, and then that's just a more specific link than the top one. So we'll open those 3.
Sure. Now we have a more existential question, which probably won't be possible to work through just by looking at a screen. So I don't know if you want to talk about the existential question first, or whether you want to look at the text. Both are fine.
Which existential question is that separate from either of the issues, or is it part of one of these 2 issues?
Well, it's apparent contradiction, so it's
Okay, then let's do the easy one first, Well,
Okay.
I don't know if it's easy. And then we'll talk about it as part of 116. So this one, I don't think there's been a pull request open yet. Let me just verify there wasn't one just opened. Yeah, there's not. Okay. So this one was a month ago. I don't know if this one's already been done. And so this is the discussion around mutually authenticated and encrypted channel. And the suggestion to change it to a tested communication. So my question is there been any, has this been happening? No, okay, so this is on this text right here. And so Dan, I think we touched on this one in a previous meeting, but there's not been any pull request here. So what do we think the right thing is here? Do we leave it this way? He suggested a tested channel in both of these two cases. What do people think on this text here? So I'll put this up on the screen, let people reread through this. So
Personally, I like the idea of mutually authenticated and encrypted because, you know, that's what we're trying to do is help with the privacy as well. There might be cases where you don't do that, but I'd rather defer to the thing that everybody really wants to do rather than something that's less dumbed down. So I don't know what to do until I have a pull request to look at that.
my recollection of what you said at a previous meeting was the attestation point is covered by this bullet. And these are a list of things to be used together. And if you use those two together, you get what Dan was looking for. That's my recollection of what, and I think I nodded and said, yeah, that sounds okay to me.
Correct.
Does anybody else have an opinion on this one? No, leave as is, make some change. Anybody else care? I think we still do have quorum here, right? Character Helen just confirmed, but I think if nobody else speaks up, then we can accept that the consensus is that it is good enough as is. It is not a consensus for change.
Yes, we do still have quorum.
And I'm just using that as a measure of we have sufficient community people here that if nobody else supports a change, that we generally have consensus among everybody here, whether you're voting or not. I'm just using quorum as a measure to say, do we have sufficient community here? So
I think the test is not just good enough, is really better the way it is right now.
okay, then given that we have enough voting members on here, I'm going to close this one because we have enough to count this as that consensus. So, okay. It's also occurred to me that we had a bunch more people join since the beginning. So let me look and see if there's anybody that has not introduced themselves at least twice. I think Alec, you've introduced yourself twice before. This is like your third meeting or something. I see Drasco is if you've not introduced yourself at least twice in a TAC meeting, would you like to pause and just introduce yourself for a minute here, Drasco?
Yes, sure. So not introduced. So Ultraviolet joined recently the Confidential Computing Consortium, and basically we are trying to make a multi-party computation, secure multi-party computation. So the interesting, I would say, background from our side is that so we come from Serbia, and we won one very interesting grant from Serbian Ministry of Technology for the project that we are doing with the University of Belgrade that is exactly targeting confidential computing AI/ML in a multi-party context. And so this is what we are currently working on, and also really interested in, pushing this technology forward, especially looking at the AMD SCV solutions, projects like NARCs and Veracruz, and also looking at the advancement on the TE side, on the SGX side, sorry, and TDX. So that's a little bit of background from my side.
Awesome. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Glad to have you here. And I briefly jump back since you weren't here at the very beginning. If this is your first meeting, right?
This is correct, yes.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go back here just to make sure you feel welcome here, that this meeting is public and recorded. And although we have voting members, the only things we really vote on is budget and meeting approval. Budget and meeting minutes approval. And so everything else in these meetings is supposed to be collaborative, where everybody is equals here. And so please participate as a full member. We'd love to have any of your comments and stuff. You're absolutely welcome. Don't think of yourself as being a second-class citizen in any sense. You are a full member, just like every other person in the public is here. So all the discussions we're having right now, we're trying to get consensus among everybody here. So don't be shy. Go ahead and speak up if you have use your opinions from your organization or personal or whatever. So I just want to make sure you feel that you're welcome, and we're ready to accept any of the contributions that you have. So
Thanks a lot. Definitely, we would like to really get involved more and more. For now, this is a first meeting and we are learning, and hopefully we'll be able to contribute very soon.
Okay, awesome. All right, and I think everybody else has introduced themselves. Like I think Alec was our last person that introduced himself twice in the last 2 meetings. So.
And I'm still here.
And you're still here, yeah. Keep coming back, yeah. Thank you. All right, so I guess we can go on to the existential question, Eric. So I'm just going to put up the common terminology stuff. If you'd like to introduce the existential question, and then I can flip over to 116 when we're ready. So
that would be fine. Basically, the question came up 2 meetings ago, and the question was, the terms didn't exactly seem to match the packages that we had highlighted in the diagram. And the existential question is, are the terms we're defining about the technology boundaries of what's encrypted, or are the terms that we're defining about what is being packaged in order to provide to an operator or an end user? And in either case, there has to be some changes to the terminology. For example, if we're talking about the boundaries of what's encrypted, we today have no technologies which encrypt a confidential container. So there really wouldn't be any confidential container definitions. There are the minimum set of what is being encrypted within the terms here. So I think there's agreement that these basic columns and the basic definitions of what is covered or not covered are there. But the question then comes down, is our term about the technology or about the package? Now, if we skirt back up to the definitions of the terms, we can see if we do make this about the definitions of what is actually encrypted, we run into issues. For example, the definition of a confidential process is a process that is executed inside a hardware TE. Well, that would be true for something that is supported by a confidential VM. So if we make the definition a technology bounded definition, then our larger containers of encryption would meet the definitions of the other terms as well. So we have changes that will need to be made in either case. My personal preference is that we're trying to define terms that are used by packaging and delivery of something encrypted. Now, there are very valid reasons to say I want to define the bounds of the technology which is being used to protect various elements. And that is the existential question. Are we defining the packages of what is being delivered for sale, or are we defining the boundaries of what is technically being protected within the isolation technology in play.
Okay, so I have my own opinion, but let me throw it out for others to answer first. So who wants to weigh in before I go? Because I don't want to bias other people's opinions just because I'm a moderator. So if I don't hear anybody, then I'll give my own opinion to see discussion. But somebody else wants to. Okay, Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess that Eric resumed very well the situation. Okay, my preference, I would say, would be to define what is secured by the technology. So it's more technology approach. I propose this just because we define confidential computing as a from the technology point of view and not from the software package point of view. That's why it would be my preference. But if we go the other way around, to be honest with you, I'm fine. Just we need to make clear that we are talking about software package and not about what is protected by the TE, in fact.
Okay, so for anybody that's new to this discussion, because I know we have one or two new people on the call here, Kurt, can you copy this into the chat so anybody else can bring it up on their own machine if they want to? But the issue file is there's a contradiction in the document right now where this one says, for example, a confidential VM is a virtual machine that's executed inside of a TE, whereby code and data within the entire VM image is protected from the hypervisor and the host operating system. Okay, so there's this definition here, and then the diagram down below, confidential VM is used for terms where that's not the case. And so here's a case where the entire VM includes, which is the yellow box here, includes the guest OS, which is outside the confidential computing spot, where the definition above says only things that the guest OS would be inside. So these two pictures match the definition above, and this one, and this one don't match the definition above. And so we're trying to say, do we fix the diagram, fix the definitions, or both? Right? That's what this issue is about. So, anybody else? Otherwise, I'm in line. But if somebody else wants to weigh in.
Let me just add one thing, just to
Yeah,
put it. We need a term for both. We have to have a way of covering both. That's, I don't think in debate. I think the question is, if we choose one set of terms or another, what are the impacts to the market, and where do we optimize the term? If we do go with a technology bound, we only need a term for the package bound, and where do we optimize is more of a market-facing question than a technology question. And that's my big concern, is that what do we need more? Do we need more to define the package, or do we need more to define the tech? And I don't have a good answer. I'm happy to go either way, and that's where I'm at.
No, I think that's an excellent framing. Thank you for the elaboration. I agree with all that. I guess I'll give my, Peng Lin has his hand up. You can go.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
My suggestion is that we still keep the definition and change the diagram. I think the definition is very clear, and not only for the users, but also like Eric said that he worried about the market. I think is that if the definition is clear, then the market or the user will understand what is confidential VM means. I think the whole VM is confidential is more easy to understand. Yeah.
Okay, Alec.
I just want to second that statement that it feels like right now there's a lot of ambiguity on what exactly is meant by confidential computing. A lot of people are making claims that with vastly different technology. And so if we can get a finer grained vocabulary, invent new terms, as was suggested before, I think that would be fantastic. It would allow us to have more precise conversations.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and give my own view here, because I do agree with what Eric said. So I want to my main point is going to be about what Eric just said about how do we do with the marketing stuff. But let me start off with a why before I get to that, which is when we defined the term confidential computing as a brand, right? We said it's performing computation where in a hardware-based TEE, right? And so we my goal is to try to not devalue the brand of confidential computing. Okay, and so whenever we put confidential as an adjective in front of a word, right? My preference is to keep the definition as being, like entire inside a hardware-based TEE, because that is what helps to strengthen the brand of confidential computing as we have defined it, as opposed to if we change the definitions here, then because the word to confidential, that would cause confusion and devalue the brand of confidential computing. And by devalue the brand, what I mean is that cause people to believe that confidential computing does not mean performing all computation, but only some computation inside. And so that's why when using the term confidential in front of something, that's why I like these definitions right here, because it helps to support the definition of confidential computing as we've defined it, instead of trying to cause confusion of it. Now, that said, I do agree with Eric that we need something that marketing people will say, right? Because if you say confidential VM means this thing right here, and what they're deploying is a VM that internally contains a confidential process, or internally contains a confidential library, or internally contains a confidential container, then what do they call that? Because if people start using the term confidential VM for all of those possibilities, including this one here, then everybody will be confused, and that's what we want to avoid, right? And so that's why I agree with Eric that we probably do want a term, or to have a recommended term for somebody to use. It's just my opinion is they would not use confidential VM unless it meets this definition. And so that's why my view is that we should have some term up here that we recommend people use at this level. And so if it was me, I would remove the word confidential from this row, and whatever we call it, I don't know, and have another row that says whether it's a confidential VM, which would only apply to certain ones into here. And the marketing people might use whatever we put in this top row and not use the term confidential VM unless there's some more complicated term like VM containing a confidential container, which is a mouthful, and marketing people probably wouldn't like it. So that's why I don't have an immediate term off the top of my head. But that's why I believe that we need to have maybe two sets of terms, where there's the technical one and the marketing one, but the confidential is a prefix I would like to reserve for the technical one. So in that sense, I'm aligned with what Penguin and what Alex said. But as far as I do completely get Eric's point, and would love us to have terms. I'm just not sure that these terms are the ones that the marketing one would be. I mean, I'm looking for something else to go in this top row here, and move these terms to maybe a separate row, maybe in between these two. Would be my suggestion. I don't know what you think of that, Eric. So
I think it's fair. I think we have people saying they want to have it match the tech, and I respect that, and we can do that. There are a number of things that means, though. We have no confidential container implementations, or none that I know that are coming. Confidential process.
I did have a comment there. You just reminded me. I completely agreed with one of the things that you said, which said if you had, I think what you said is that if you're deploying a confidential VM, that it internally contains confidential processes, right? And so if you think about like a Grameen model or a Occlum model, then one could deploy a confidential container into an Occlum or Grameen system. And then there could be, it's just something, maybe they haven't implemented it yet, but it would absolutely be possible because you already have something larger that's confidential that you're deploying it into. Just like you could do the same thing for a confidential process, you could deploy that into a Grameen or an Occlum or any other libOS system. So one could construct one. So the fact that one doesn't exist right now, we know it's possible to do as long as you can support a confidential VM, right? If you've got, a SEV SNP system, you could build something that deploys a confidential container into it without having to change any of the architecture or the terminology here.
Could we? I really don't know. That is possible. I guess there'll be some questions if you have to run a process within its own machine.
I mean, like the TEEP protocol is designed to do that. The TEEP protocol is designed to deploy confidential processes into a TEE. And so examples in the trust zone case where you're the closest thing to it. It's not you're the guest OS. It's more the trusted OS like Opti or Trusty or something like that, and you're deploying the trusted application into it. And so it's more like but it's more than the application, the process. In the trust zone case, there actually is. I don't know if guest OS is the right term, but you actually do have something there that's your trusted OS, which is not shown in this picture here, where you say trust zone. It's probably closer to this far right one, which says trust zone here. But inside the red box is actually the trusted OS in between process and TE gem in the trust zone case here. And so TEEP is meant to do that. So you've got some process that's running in there. It's a TEEP agent, right? And then you're deploying the confidential process into that, and it's the TEEP agent that's the one that actually accepts it and deploys it inside of the trusted OS.
Yes, I do think trusted process is something that can be done with existing technology. I don't think we have an example of confidential container, because I don't know if container is in any of the elements here.
I'm only hypothesizing that there's nothing that would prevent somebody from doing it. If you have this model right here, the one that has like SCV, S&P, TDX, etc. If you have this one right here, if you have a guest OS here, and if you have in this guest OS, you have something that is accepting, downloads, whether this is the TEEP protocol or something else that's a more like a Kubernetes running inside here, a Kube agent. That can accept containers, then you could actually build that today on existing processors, right? In this column here.
Agreed.
So I agree with you that I don't know of anybody that's done it before, but I don't know if there's any blockers to it if somebody wanted to. So,
but the boundary of protection would be beyond the container itself, because you're pulling the guest OS, and well, you can make the guest OS there. But the question is, what happens when the boundary is more inclusive than the term?
It doesn't change the term here. It just is executed inside of a hardware-based DEE.
Yes. So
it's whether you have different ones of these that are isolated from each other, right? And so our confidential process is isolated from each other. Yeah, our confidential container is isolated from each other. And in some cases, the answer is yes. And in some cases, the answer is no, depending on the isolation methodology, right?
And so we then have to say that we accept a confidential process, for example, that would be within a confidential VM implementation. So our process wouldn't be a standalone definition of the boundary of the dotted red line. It would be allowing people to assert a delivery of a software system that is within the larger, more inclusive bound. And that's fine, but we got to realize the boundaries of this are not going to then align to the technology. They're going to align to what people are asserting as a subsystem within the overall protected area. So we can do that, but there are downsides that way as well.
Okay, Matthew, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes. To summarize, but I guess that Eric explained it very well. So I just wanted to make sure that I understood what you said, Dave. In fact, when we talk about a confidential process, in fact, so it's a process running in a TE, and there might be other components in the TE. We don't know which ones, but it's not all. I mean, it's not only this process that is in the TE. And so that's fine for me, but it's true that might be misleading. I mean, okay, in this case, we don't define exactly all the components that are inside the boundary of the TE, but at least we define what are the components that are protected or isolated by this TE, which makes sense in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think Eric's point actually is a good question that maybe that we should have some text in here about. I don't know if we can think of what to say, but like in the SCV SNP, this N here stands for nesting, right? Right now there's only one red box, right? I don't know if there's architectures that would isolate in a confidential computing sense processes from each other with a red box inside of a red box. Is there that type of nesting concept? Because then you could, but otherwise, Eric is right. In this case, we only have one red box, right? They're not isolated from any sense other than the guest OS provides isolation between processes, but it's not hardware enforced, it's enforced by the software and the guest OS part. So Naveen, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's also, we may also want to beef up the attributes of the hardware TE itself and how, what rules should be enforced there. So when we look at it, at this picture, I mean, it's great. I mean, I can understand the deployment model and the different processes involved, but it doesn't tell me in detail whether it's rightly protected as we scale out a system. For example, if two TEs are talking to each other, can process in one TE go and directly place data in the memory of the second TE? And if so, is that an infiltration? And how do we have rules around that, right? Or one option is you can say that's a specification of the hardware TE itself and outside the scope of this document. That's one way to look at it.
We did talk about some of the system level implications in previous calls, and we decided, this is really important, but we're not ready for TE to TE communications yet. So there's a whole bunch of future work that is going to be around how do you make sure you build clusters of TEs being able to talk together. And I think at this point that was placed out of scope. Whether we reopen it now is a question. I do think that nailing down some boundaries is useful to allow those larger questions of clusters of TEs to be addressed by this group later.
I'm also thinking about Peng-Lin's presentation in your with respect to trying to put Peng-Lin's presentation, one of his points, together with one of the things that you mentioned, Eric. Right now, the packaging model assumes that everything in the yellow box is packaged as a unit, right? That's the definition of the yellow box, right? That all this is deployed together. If you were to say, I have one thing that can be deployed into, say, a confidential VM or deployed into a thing, let's say you could dynamically add another process as its own package into an exit, like you're taking this box right here, right? The confidential VM one that's the S&P, TDX, et cetera, right? And saying, okay, let's say this is true here, but there's also another process that is actually packaged separately and deployed into this, okay? That concept is not mentioned in this document someplace, but it does come up like when Peng-Lin was walking through different cases, right? It says, is the personalization data bundled or not bundled, right? Is a JavaScript, is that a personalization data or whatever? So I can imagine cases where you have something like a process that itself is a separate package that is deployed into a larger package, right? Whether there's isolation or not, which is a different question, right? Even if there's not hardware-based isolation, there's just, guest OS provided isolation, then it does affect what the packaging model terminology might be, right? Is it still called a confidential process or whatever the packaging model term might be? If is this part just these two pieces up here that is bundled together and then deployed into a yellow box that's deployed separately, right? What if the app data up here is the personalization data in Peng-Lin's presentation that is bundled separately from the process or everything else on here? So just the app data is bundled separately. The app data plus the process, the app data and the process being separate from this one. Those are the different cases that Peng-Lin walked through. I'm just wondering, I don't know yet, does that have an impact on our in this document in some way? Should we say something about different layers of packaging of nesting? Does that affect our packaging terminology? I don't know. I just want to throw that question out there because Peng-Lin's made me think when we were going through it. So
I do have an opinion. Go ahead.
Dave, you're still accepting comments in this document, right? Maybe instead of taking this time from this meeting, I can post a couple of questions there.
We haven't decided, so I'd say it. Sure. I mean, we would like to get it published as a white paper, but we would rather have it be right. And since we don't have a new diagram to review right now, my expectation is it'll be next meeting at the earliest. So sure, if you got stuff that's easy to agree on, then yeah, go ahead. Generate a pull request.
I think a confidential container is probably, or the way we define it here, this probably not match up with people's intuition No, yeah, I mean, based on the, I mean, this matches up, but not
Okay.
the diagram.
Oh, yeah. I think right now I think we have a bunch of people arguing that these labels right here don't match what's down below, and that so far I've not heard from somebody that we need to
And, well, in
change the
particular, I
definitions
would
there.
think that, yeah, people want to say that you can do confidential containers with some other technology. And I was also going to mention that, I mean, we're showing a single package here, sort of, right? But there could be multiple packages thrown together to create the complete, end thing, right? So, especially when it comes to confidential container, right? You may have, you know, a Docker image from one half and like a in TCP runtime from somewhere else, and then you combine them, right? And depending on how you combine them, you get a different measurement, right? But they could all be considered confidential container.
Yeah, and I don't think we've talked about that before this meeting, but yeah, that's the conclusion that I'm learning from this. Yeah. Matthew?
Yeah, when I look at this diagram, my impression, I mean, if I want to define a kind of isolation model, I would use all the term preceded by TCB, in fact. So just above the package software layer, you see there is TCB library, TCB process, etc., etc. And that's in fact, let's say the modules, the components that are isolated by the TEE. If I look at the figure, does it make sense?
Although I think currently in these definitions, the word TCP and the word confidential are synonymous in this sense, I think, but somebody can correct me if they see that that's not the case.
Well, the TCP also includes stuff that's the shim outside to get in and out. So you do have to trust a little bit that is outside the protected area.
I will dispute that. I will say you're only trusting it for DOS protection, nothing more. You're not trusting it for code integrity, data integrity, or data confidentiality, right? You're not trusting it for any of those three. You're trusting it for DOS protection only. That's my assertion.
I think that's the majority case. I'm not sure it's for all technologies.
If you can come up with a counterexample, I'm listening. But right now, that is my stake in the ground. I'm repeating that because I think Mike Marcella said the same thing, and he's not on the call here, and so I'm hesitant to speak for him. But I believe that was his point a while back. So,
and I just want to make another comment. So it's related to this NIST paper. It's an internal report on hardware security, where they mention confidential computing, and they don't use the term confidential VM or confidential application, but they are talking about VM isolation and application isolation and memory isolation. And it looks to me that it's an easier approach. Let's say in terms of definition, you say what you isolate from the rest. In our case, we say, okay, there is something in the T. I mean, we define one piece of software that is inside the T. So I'm just wondering, okay, those are two different approaches, but maybe the NIST approach is, let's say, easier to find a definition, or to define a definition.
so I'm going to come back to try to summarize possible ways forward, given that the number of hands up has gone back to 0 now, but feel free to put your hand up. I think I have not heard anybody arguing that we don't need marketing terms. Okay. I think we've heard that we don't want to change the actual definitions in here, which still leaves open the question is, are these the marketing terms or are these not the marketing terms? We do need different marketing terms, right? But we agree that we need some marketing terms. We agree that these definitions are right, but we don't necessarily have consensus these are the correct marketing terms. We believe that the picture doesn't match and the picture should change somehow. I think we've heard that people do like having these terms, although I did hear, I think the last comment from Matthew suggesting otherwise, but I think the consensus so far is that these terms right here are useful because people have already started using them. I think Alex's last comment, I think, was in that category among others. And so I think we have to figure out what do we want to use or what do we want to suggest as marketing terms. I'm now going to switch over to personal opinion here. That my personal opinion is I think we should keep the terms confidential library, confidential process, confidential container, and confidential VM, including confidential container, but those might not be the marketing terms. That's why I like those terms, and I like them because people are already using them, and having us say something actually lends some sanity into otherwise what will generate into chaos. And my fear is that it will devalue or dilute the confidential computing term, right? So that's why I would like to keep them. But if we can come up with terms that we would suggest as marketing terms, I would love that. I just don't know what those would be yet. I'm open for discussions there. I can only think of complicated wordings like I'm deploying a VM that contains a confidential container, right? That's long. It's technically correct, but it's long. So that's why I'm looking for if there's something better that is a way that can be used for marketing that is not using terms incorrectly according to our definitions of confidential fill in the blank. So
I think that's well put, and I'll throw one other example out, and that is I've seen plenty of people claiming confidential containers using SGX. So if our terms do not allow constructs that build from the more discrete or more contained technologies or the smaller scope, then we're going to run into issues with the people who want to sell it.
I believe that it is well, I should say I can't say that I believe. I have, since I am not an expert on Grameen or Oclum or any other libOS one, and there's probably people on this call that know far more about them than I do. Is that unless they all tell me that it is not possible to do a confidential container with Grameen or a confidential container with Oclum or a confidential container with some other libOS, then I would hypothesize until shown otherwise that confidential container is possible with SGX until they tell me, no, we tried that, it doesn't work because of whatever. So just because I don't know enough to say that it's not so. But it's not quite this picture that's on the screen right here, but there may be a confidential container if you actually have a Grameen or OS wrapper that you can deploy a confidential container into. I don't know if somebody from Grameen or Oclum or whatever can comment. So I don't want to remove this column just because although I understand, Eric, you're questioning whether confidential container and SGX would ever appear in the same column. I get your question there. Just I hypothesize that it might be valid. You know, maybe there's a different label that goes down here. I don't know.
So this is why the question is existential. I don't know the answer, but I do think maybe getting some end user advisory council input on this problem would help.
You mean on the marketing term category?
Yeah, and what should be covered or not. I mean, we're kind of hitting the wall is the way I'm getting it. And if we're trying to figure out what do we optimize on, you know, a different marketing term, great. But let's figure out what they think is important to the package.
So who here is part of the end user advisory council? I think Mark is. Anybody else? Or Mark, do you have any opinions on this one?
Oh, you mean me?
Yes,
Sorry,
you're the only one that I see right now, but I think there's only one Mark on the call. So yeah, I think you're the only one here that I recognize as being an end user advisory committee participant. And so do you have any advice on what you think a good marketing term would be from an end user perspective?
What are my choices again?
So just to refresh, feel free to come up with your own choice, right? We've said the terms confidential container, process, library, VM are these definitions up here. And so if somebody were going to be deploying a VM image that contains internally a confidential process. So let's say you have a Docker container that inside has an SGX enclave, not the entire container, but inside the container. You look inside there and one of the binaries is an SGX enclave, right? What would you call that in a marketing sense? If you can't call it would you call it a container holding a confidential process, right? Which is very wordy, right? What do you have any advice or opinions from a marketing perspective?
Well, look, I think there are two. Let's not confuse target demographics. I mean, yes, I like you're saying user advisory council. I am more of an engineer than an end user. Okay. Ultimately, I think these four designations make a lot of sense. Now, it is also true that under certain circumstances, you will have nesting, right? So you may have a confidential container or confidential VM, which is shielded from its host, machine and the host hypervisor. But then, in addition, within it, you might want to have an SGX hosted. I do not know, like library or an SGX hosted process, because you further do not trust what's inside the container itself. I don't think that deserves a special marketing term, if that makes sense, because I mean, yes, it would model matters a lot, but you can take a look at these in isolation. You can basically say confidential library shielded from the process, confidential process shielded from OS, confidential container and VM shielded from the host hypervisor, and you can also, as a side note, say, look, these technologies can in fact scale and the nest in some cases. I think that's all you need to say.
Okay, I see.
I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean, I think that's the sanest way to go about it.
Okay. I have one remark also.
Okay, go ahead,
maybe maybe a remark related to the term confidential container. There are several technologies that are exactly, as you said, putting the container in the SGX and so on, trying to make it user friendly and easy to deploy and change nothing for the developer, etc. But there is a big I would say work coming from I think IBM and Apple on the CNCF and building the kata containers, which are kind of, related to the VM. So they demand SCV, and, the big open source project called Confidential Containers that is now part of the CNCF, to which I don't know how the, CCC, I would say, does the liaison, but
there is confidential containers.
No, that's a good point. I mean, we have had a CNCF tech talk in a previous meeting about kata containers. So
I think that like this term confidential containers here can represent two different things, something that I don't know, maybe Anjuna is working on, or some other, or some other companies, and something like this, that in my opinion is different.
Yeah, I think I also agree that if you're using SGX to claim that you have a confidential container, you are probably not going to have a very long shelf life, because containers really are a VM-like technology, and they are best protected with the TDX or CV. Yeah. So I do not know if we necessarily need a marketing term for every possible way of stacking these.
Okay. So I think I've heard that it may be useful to have a concept of nesting mentioned, but you don't have to go into details about all the possibilities.
Well, I mean, in a more of a technical white paper, you might want to explain that a confidential, when we mention confidential, whatever, asterisk, it really has to do with protecting from the hosting environment, and the hosting environment really is a question of scope. Right, so it's one thing for a library, it's another for process, it's another for container and then VM, right? So and the fact that what it doesn't do is it doesn't, it doesn't mean that the contents of the confidential asterisk themselves are not malicious. And you may need to have a shell inside a shell for some of these things. Now,
Okay, so just
I
make
do
sure I
not know
understand
if
your
it's-
point. If you're, I think what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, if I've got it right. If you deploy a confidential process into a confidential VM, then you're saying the meaning of that sentence would be that the confidential process is protected even from the guest OS in the confidential VM. Did I get that right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, I got you. Okay, it's just I'm trying to get this right because as far as next action items, we probably will want a pull request, and I may be signing up to do that. I want to make sure I'm capturing your point correctly, because if I do it, then I want to make sure I'm capturing your point. So, okay.
Yeah.
And add to that, that was kind of my assumption coming in as well, is that the process would be protected from others. Let me add one thing to the table, because we've kind of been skirting around it. You're saying nesting, and I think nesting is cool. One of the things that at least I was thinking was that the definition and the boundary of the confidential space, whatever is protected and isolated, would be backed up by some evidence. And we're talking about heap and other things loading additional information in. We haven't talked about the mechanism for protecting or validating additional evidence that would talk about what is going on within the added code. So if we're talking nesting, we're probably going to have to figure out what does the evidence match up to the current confidential compute environment, and that is something to consider here as well.
All right, Alec, you've had your hand up for a while. Please go ahead.
Sure, I just want to make sure that when I make use of these terms, that's the reason I came to this common terminology section, that my use of these terms meets with the intent of this consortium. So if I use the term confidential VM in literature, I'm okay to use that term even when not all of the bits inside of the VM are confidential. If there's a piece inside of that VM within the TCB, as in that SGX column that we've been looking at, I can refer to that whole VM as confidential because it has some piece inside of it that truly is confidential.
I think so far we're
I just
saying
want to make sure
that would not be
Sorry.
okay.
Then, okay, so then the column headings is what
Correct.
this consortium is considering clarifying a little bit more.
Correct. We're saying these labels up here are what needs to be fixed here, and these definitions up here. So far, we're saying that these definitions up here should not be changed. This text right here is correct, and that this label being above these three columns is what is incorrect and will be changed somehow. And we're trying to figure out what the right way to change it to is.
Cool. I missed that term. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. I think Naveen, you had your hand up. Did we get your question answered? Did you want to weigh in?
Sorry, I was muted. I'm still a little confused on the nesting concept. So we talked about, for example, a virtual process inside a virtual VM. Sorry, confidential process inside a confidential VM. So from the definition you have up above, the confidential VM is protected from hypervisor and the, yeah, I get that. When we say confidential process inside a confidential VM, does it mean the process itself is protected from guest operating system?
That was the question I was just asking Mark, and in Mark's view, the answer would be yes.
Okay.
I think we do need clarity. I think we should strive not to muddle terms, and just because someone's implementation isn't exactly up to snuff, right? Because clarity is very, very important to people trying to make decisions around which technology to pick up, and there has to be as little fine print as possible.
Yeah, what raised my, I think, interest in that part was, I mean, ignoring all implementations, when we say something is confidential, the responsibility is on that entity to manage its own page tables. That is the logical translation from its address space to however the TE is storing contents, right? So when we say virtual confidential VM, I mean, there are techniques out there, and we don't have to key in on implementation, where the guest page tables are protected from second level page tables.
So
when we talk about a what confidential process inside that VM, we are saying guest page tables are not trusted. No, and the confidential process has to maintain its own runtime for address translation. Right. I mean, are we going to that level
Well,
of detail
so
in this
yeah,
white
so
paper?
certainly page tables, because page tables are protected at runtime. But I also want to make sure that we need to basically there is a baseline for what makes something confidential that extends beyond memory protection. So you need to have your own. You need to be given your own source of entropy. You need to be able to also attest yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Right. These are all important characteristics.
So I'm not. So I was asking questions to make sure I understood the point. Although I'm not yet convinced that the answer is what I would argue for, as I've been trying to form my own opinion. If I think about the trust zone case, where I explained that you have like opT is your trusted OS, and you're deploying processes, trusted applications into trust zone to be run on opT, and you're using something like the TEAP protocol to do that, right? I would say that you're deploying confidential processes because it matches this picture over here. The only difference is that in between process and TESHIN, there's actually an opT piece that's inside the red box, but outside of the package, right? And so in that sense, the picture doesn't quite match because opT is not shown here, right? And so I would still call that there, and processes are protected from each other, but they're not protected from opT, okay? And so now, if you take that model and you then give that as an analogy to like the SMP picture over here, I think that it would be perhaps overly constraining to say that you have to have your confidential process to be protected from the guest OS if you're not protecting PAs from opT, right? There should be some model that you're doing that. Maybe you call it confidential processes, yes, but you still have something that's like a guest OS. Here's the trusted OS. That you may be packaging also with TEAP to say, I'm going to update my opT and I'm going to update my trusted applications, and I have nesting in the sense of packages. They're still inside the same TEE, and the isolation between processes, or TAs in this case, is done by opT. And that's a model that people use today. And I'm trying to figure out what the right way to have terms for it is, right? Because I'm not sure it's saying that your processes are protected from the guest OS. And so what term would we use for that? Because I think that would be fairly common. So that's my hesitation in just accepting exactly the way that Mark phrased it. I'm looking for appropriate, maybe wordsmithing or whatever to make it be practically usable in cases like trust zone, and even in like SMP cases where they're analogous.
So what is the let's say terminology ultimately it has to translate into users' understanding of what it is they're actually getting. So when you say we have this opT situation, what impact does it have on the security posture of the entity that wants to be protected?
So I'm going to use the trust zone answers, but again, my intent is to not constrain. It's trust zone as an example, right? I imagine exactly the same things would be true for other ones, right? That opT in that sense is sort of like the hypervisor to OSs, right? It's the OS to processes. It does provide process isolation. The hardware isn't doing that, or perhaps a better way to phrase it is, it's the trusted OS is leveraging hardware support for doing process isolation, okay? But the trusted OS is a thing that's actually controlling the isolation levels of the processes, right? So in that sense, you're trusting it, but it is providing process isolation between processes. You're not protected from the trusted OS, but the OS is responsible for isolating processes from each other by leveraging hardware support for separate page tables or whatever it is. It's the hardware provides.
So it's like virtual memory.
Yeah, inside the TEE, correct. So you have process isolation from each other, but you're not protected from the trusted OS.
Yeah, then I would not apply the term confidential to that. I think that just I think really that call it isolated, like because it's like it muddles the terms. Like I think we will be served very well by holding a hard line on basically saying if you're calling asterisk confidential, this means that asterisk is protected from its hosting environment.
That's not the current definition. The current definition is of confidential computing as performing computation inside a hardware-based TEE. The definition of confidential computing is not phrased to say you're protected from, the normal OS, because that assumes that there is one, and there doesn't have to be one. In
Well, by
confidential
that definition, my Microsoft Word and Excel running separately, isolated from each other by the kernel, are confidential computing, and I think that's wrong.
No, confidential computing is the protection of data in use by performing computation in a hardware-based TEE, and what you described does not meet that definition.
The way you phrased it, I would claim it does, because it is like virtual memory is hardware protection. It's
not
really,
a
I think, the key, and again, I'll reiterate that.
Not
To
hardware
me,
protection, it's a TEE, right? Which is a TEE is the things that provide those three guarantees right there, right? So.
But protections against what? If you don't say that it's protection against your hosting environment, I think then you muddle the terms. That's what I'm saying.
I think that's implicit in hardware TEE, right? Hardware TEE is protecting against a hosting environment, but it's good to call out. I like the way you phrased it, Mark. I think.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, accepted. It means it's protected. Just to answer your question, Mark, it's protected against things outside the TEE, right? And so what you're saying is that as long as you're using the term hosting environment with what is outside the TEE with respect to the confidential blah, which I think is your intent, right? So I think that's what you're getting at. So if I call confidential process, then what you're saying is the TEE, the thing that hosts the process, you would consider to be outside the TEE of that process.
Yeah, be very clear about who the enemy is.
And where curveball got thrown at me was, Mark, when we said nested confidential computing, that is confidential process inside a confidential VM, that's like two yellow rectangles here, right? One inside another.
Correct.
They actually be, in Mark's definition, is two red rectangles. Yellow is the packaging and red is the isolation.
Yeah, correct. Would be two reds. Yes.
Okay, your example would be two reds. Yeah, two reds. Now,
two reds.
When we map that into a hardware TEE, I mean, how do we get that concept of nesting at the hardware level? I mean, only one of them can be a hardware TEE.
There may be some of these implementations, and I don't know if SNP is one of them, just because it has N as nesting, right? That you may actually support that concept. Nested page tables and things. So NP is nested paging, right? Secure nested paging.
Right. It's secure nested paging, yes.
And so if the processor itself supports nesting of red boxes, then you can do it. Some of these may not support nesting of red boxes, only have one red box, and then you can do things like I was saying, deploying a container into a TEE that's hosted by Aquam, or a process into something that's hosted by Aquam. But whether you can use the term confidential container, I think is what, or confidential process is what Mark is getting at.
Yeah, again, your original question to me was, end user marketing. And I will double down on what I said, even if it doesn't match what we currently define it as, because I really do believe that what I said is what I intended for it to mean, what I would want it to mean.
So I want to give some action items here, and there's at least 3 action items that I might suggest people for, although one of them I have nobody to suggest. So one action item is we've just been having this discussion about nesting, and I'd like to see a pull request that would be some text we can consider for next meeting about the concept of nesting. And so I'm going to suggest that maybe, Mark, you and I co-author the pull request. I'm happy to take a first shot if you want, or you're welcome to, but I think it would be useful if you and I work together on that one before next
Yes,
meeting.
I would love to. Absolutely.
Okay. As far as updating the diagram, I think, Eric, you're the only person that has the source for the actual diagram. Everybody else just has the JPEG. And so any diagram updates we've got to give to Eric, although if we can give them some guidance, that's great. But I'd love to give Eric you the action item to make any updates for next meeting that you think are appropriate for the diagram.
I can try something. I don't know what it's going to be yet, because I think the packaging model term has to change. I don't know where.
Yeah. I know you want guidance as to what to do. Got that. But as far as doing it, unless you share the source, that we got to give you the action item to update the JPEG. That leaves the third action item.
I think I posted the source. The source should be on the GitHub.
Oh, okay. I did not see it. Word, sorry.
If I didn't, I'll post it, but I thought I put the PowerPoint up because that's what the source was for that.
This is what's in the directory right now.
I will add it before this meeting is over.
Okay, so this is why I said it has to be assigned to you. I only saw Markdown and 2 JPEGs, nothing else in here to generate those JPEGs. So,
all right, that will change.
Okay, and so then that still leaves what do we do about actual marketing terms? Because right now I could imagine one way to address it would be to put some text in front of this, or maybe this part goes to a different section. These things are some terminology, but are they packaging model terminology? Do we need some other marketing terms? Is there something else they put into here that we put in another column? I need to figure out what we need to do there, and I'm looking for volunteers because I don't have a suggestion there. I only have the very wordy terms that I threw out before, which I'm not sure I like, but they're a placeholder. But
I'm happy to collaborate with anyone. I'm not sure I want to take the lead on specifically packaging, but if you take up packaging, I will work with you.
Anybody want to volunteer for marketing terms to help Mark?
I think that we should talk at the End User Advisory Council on this question to see if they have an opinion.
Okay, so then Eric, do you want to work with Mark on bringing this up at an End User Advisory Council meeting or mailing this discussion, whatever?
Yes.
Okay, got it. So you guys have an action item to bring it up within End User EUAC. Okay.
And when is that? Or is it just an email discussion? Is there an actual meeting?
I don't know. Eric, do you know?
I don't know. I'll start a thread with them and
Email.
everybody do discussions, and then we'll see where it goes.
Okay, sounds like email for now. Okay. Okay.
I would love to participate in that if I'm able. This is Alec. So
Yeah,
if there's a mail thread, I'm happy to participate and throw some words out there that might be useful, spur opinions.
Okay. I did have another question that was sent to me recently, and so I wanted to forward on the question to see if we have any collective opinions on this one. And I'm going to introduce the question, which is a follow-on to something that was mentioned earlier, which is what reminded me I need to bring this up. Going back to this one here, right? Confidential computing is the protection of data in use by performing computation in a hardware-based, focusing on that one, trusted execution environment. Okay, and so the question was had to do with if you have something that only so let's see, back in our white paper, right? We have that Venn diagram. Actually, there's a couple of new people here, so it probably is worthwhile me going to the diagram because it's actually easier to understand the question, because we did discuss it sort of back then. So confidential computing white papers. Let me bring up the Venn diagram so I can introduce the question here. Technical analysis, it was, yeah. All right, so I think it's this one. We had the Venn diagram in this one, or was it the other white paper? The one that had, multi-party computation, everything in that one. Must have been the technical white paper. I'm not seeing it there. Okay, yeah, I clicked on the wrong one. Yeah, it's another one. Try again. This one. This is a terminology question. All right, so our Venn diagram, here it is. All right, so if you remember this Venn diagram right here, right, we said the CCC space is down here in the hardware TE space, okay? But still in the overall trusted execution environment space, we had this virtualized software TE space over here, okay? And we said confidential computing is defined as this circle here, performing computation inside this circle. So if you're over here, you would not call it confidential computing, okay? And so the question is really, what would you call something that's sitting over here in terms of terminology? Because if you have something that can run in either one, if people are using marketing terms, what would we tell them to use, right? And so, for example, would we accept or hate the term, say, software confidential computing? If you have a confidential VM that's over here, would you accept the term software confidential VM as being over here? Or would you say, no, you can't use the word confidential for that? And so that was really the question is, if you're using confidential computing, if you're using confidential VM, if you're using confidential process or whatever, if that means over here, is there some term that you tell them to use for this one so that they're not using the same term? Okay, because otherwise people will use the same term for this thing over here and it would be incorrect. So what would we tell them for the space over here?
And
Would we say
call them
put
confidential
software in front of it?
computing versus isolated computing?
This is the question. So
Yeah.
you guys tell me, how should I respond to this question?
I'd call it isolated because ultimately it's, you know, if you're at the graces of your hosting environment, then you're not really confident, like you can't really claim confidential.
So who else has been an active speaker in the discussions? Let's see, if you've spoken up about the terminology document. So Eric and folks, if you have an opinion, what do you think that people should be using? Is, say, putting software in front of it, using a different term than confidential? What would you recommend that we answer when people ask this?
An informed opinion here, but I'll say something that makes it as clear as possible that it is not confidential, because if you want to protect the term confidential, then whatever other term you use should be very clearly distinguishable. So isolated isn't really an antonym, but we should look for something that's an antonym to confidential.
I'd agree.
Okay. So it sounds like what I'm hearing is multiple people saying use a term other than confidential, whether it's isolated, would be, nobody's argued against that one. So we'd say, okay, you
Protected
could
or
use
whatever. Yeah.
protected VM, isolated VM, something like that, but not confidential VM.
Correct.
And at least that would be somewhat consistent with our term of confidential computing. But okay, I just, I do not want to presume that adding another adjective in front of this would change the definition, or change people's opinion, but okay, I'll accept that as the, unless anybody else wants to weigh in as the collective response here that says use a different adjective like isolated, rather than putting another adjective in front of confidential.
Yeah, I would not put another adjective.
Non-dash confidential.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all for weighing in. I don't want to cut off there if somebody else has a comment here, but otherwise I'm going to come back there. Okay. No other comments on that one? Okay. So then we are now at the NARCS discussion. So over to you, Nick, to introduce the NARCS question.
All right, thank you, Dave. So the NARCS project.
Yes, Kurt?
I was just going to say, I don't believe we addressed on 117.
117 we did that one first. We said we just closed that one.
Oh, okay, that was the closed. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay, so sorry, go ahead, Nick.
No problem. Thank you everyone for supporting not just NARCS, but all projects that are part of the CCC. NARCS has been growing rapidly. We've been releasing every 4 weeks, more or less, a new version. Our last one was, I think was the week prior. And we do have a few requirements in terms of hardware that we need. An Intel and AMD. And I sent an email to the list about this. And we've been trying to do some research around the new hardware required. We know that there's a limit around $7,500 per server per year per projects. And I think this is a good amount. You can buy a very good server for this, but for confidential computing, it has been a bit challenging to find something around this. And from our research, we found $10,000 should be more a better cutoff, better limits. So I wonder if the TAC would be willing to increase their limits, if it's possible. And I think that's the question, I believe.
So we don't have quorum, so we can't call for a vote, but we can have discussion here. because now we're at 3/5 quorum right now. So between Tate, Thomas, and myself. So we've lost a bunch of people here, but I would like to hear any comments on this. This would be asking for the limit to be raised from 7,500 to 10K. So it's what, like a 33% increase is the request.
I think for a server, a normal server, the original value is very, very good. But for computational computing, it's a bit challenging. That's what we found.
See, if I remember right, I don't think we have in the slides. I don't think we have our budget slide in the tax slides, do we, Kurt? Let's see if it's in the backup someplace. It might be down here. No, I don't see our budget slide in here right now.
Yeah, we don't have it.
For next meeting, can you grab the budget slide from the last one that it appeared in and just stick it in for next meeting?
Will do.
Because, you know, as long as we still have plenty of spare budget, my recollection is we still have like, you know, 50K unallocated, waiting for a request for it that's in our budget. That's even beyond the common test infrastructure part, right? There was like 100K, and so this one has a proposal for 50K, and so we do have some spare budget we need to figure out how to use between now and the end of the year, and so I don't think we could say no, we don't have the budget, right? That part is not quite true. It's like we do need to figure out how to best use things, and if saying increasing it by 33% from 7,500 to 10,000 would actually help people, then as an individual voter, then I would not have a problem saying yes to that. So, but I want to hear what other people think, since we do have some fiscal responsibility.
I'm happy with increase.
Okay.
No problems.
Okay. If I don't hear anybody arguing otherwise, then why don't we call for a vote to conclude at the next meeting? Actually, is there any time deadline that makes any difference? Because you said you guys have shipped like every month or something like that for NARCs, right? And so, and obviously,
Yes.
even if you order stuff, it takes some time to get stuff, right? So there's nothing that's going to be urgent as far as, where 2 weeks will make a difference, right? It's setting the precedent
yeah.
going forward, right?
Yes. So actually, would you mind if I share my screen very rapidly?
Yeah, go ahead. That's fine.
Okay,
We've
thanks.
got about 3 minutes left, so
So-
I do have one last question before we close. So I want to reserve 1 minute, but go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So we have, we're creating this demo website here, and you can select either Intel or AMD, and you can upload. Let me see if I can log in. But basically, you can upload a WASM file, and you will be able to run this and deploy this inside an NARC skip on SGX. And please don't mind the error here. That's because we're still working on getting the inputs from the user. But that's basically the example that we have, and we are using a lot of both SGX and AMD for testing, for CI/CD, for infrastructure, and this has become a kind of a bottleneck right now in terms of developments, and this would be very helpful for us. So I appreciate any feedback and any help in this sense. Dave, perhaps I can lead you to your question. I don't want you to take most of the time as well.
Sorry, I missed, what was the last thing you said?
I don't want you to take much of the time. If
Yeah.
you want to ask your question.
Yes, I want to get to my question and close up the meeting here. And so I think I would like to call this one for a vote, but not during this call because we don't have quorum. So we can say on the list that the vote will conclude at the next meeting. So hopefully by next meeting we can have an answer. But that gets to my last question is when is our next meeting? Okay, so normally our next meeting is 2 weeks from right now. Okay, if you think about 2 weeks from right now, 2 weeks from right now is July 28th. And during the tech meeting slot, which is 10 o'clock Eastern time, is the actual TEEP working group meeting at IETF. So the TEEP working group is meeting exactly during the tech time slot next meeting. Okay, and so the question is, what should we do? Where one proposal is we can skip next meeting and encourage each of us to attend the TEEP meeting instead, in which case the tech meeting would be 4 weeks from now, but I'm open to other suggestions. I just want to call out the TEEP is meeting during the tech meeting slot next time. So, and I am needing to be there, so I cannot be in a tech meeting if it was during that time. And I hope some of you would like to come to TEEP. Penguin is presenting there too. Penguin and I are both presenting, so.
Yeah, I have to remotely.
Yeah.
Can we subscribe to that, invite ourselves, or?
Yes,
can you
yes.
post
This is a public meeting, although there's a registration fee, I think, for the virtual, and I don't think it's enforced or whatever. You can probably click on it or whatever. I don't know, but you're encouraged to register even if you're virtual. So you can get to the link. We can paste this in here.
Yeah. Or if you can put it in the meeting notes, we could use the link.
Yeah. So this one. Yeah, you can see in here, there's show meeting materials. Right over here is the video stream. Okay, this link right here. So you go to this page that I just pasted in the chat and you click on this and to watch the video stream. Right? And of course, if I try to do it right now, it hasn't started yet, but this would tell me whether you need to sign in or something like that. Yeah, it does ask you to log in. Okay. And so there's some relatively small fee if you're just trying to sign up for 1 day virtual, as opposed to I'm going to be there all week in person. So, so I guess my proposal then, here, not hearing otherwise, is that we do not meet on the 28th. In which case, our next meeting might not be till 4 weeks from now, unless somebody wants to propose a change to that. Which gives more time for people to do their action items. Just saying. As the 2 weeks after that would be August 11, I think. Yeah, August 11, which would be 4 weeks from today. If that's not too far out, then I see a thumbs up from Thomas. I know a number of us will be at IETF, virtually or physically. Okay, no objections? Okay, then it sounds like on the 28th, no tech meeting. Please come to the TEEP meeting if you're interested. So. All right, thumbs up from me. Great. All right, thanks all. Then with that, anything else we didn't get to, we'll defer till next call because it was time permitting anyway. So we'll keep the rest of the agenda items on the agenda for the August meeting. And with that,
Cheers.
thank you all for coming. All right, bye all.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.